Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This he taken?
Hey, Kiernan.
You put a little extra mustard on that.
I did.
A couple beats. It's funny when you do it for as long. I mean, this is episode 198. I've heard you do that introduction so many times that whenever you throw me off the rhythm, I feel like the episode's over. I can't do it.
I was just trying out some new. It's kind of like my Johnny. Like, here's Johnny. That's how I think of it in my head.
Speaking of Johnny, I saw a friend of the show, Johnny Bowman, from afar in Harvard Square just last week. And I thought it was him, but, I haven't seen him in like a decade. And I was too afraid to approach a stranger yelling, "Are you Johnny? Are you Johnny?" So I didn't. And then I LinkedIn messaged him. It was Johnny.
Is he a friend of the
really
pod?
Bad. Of course. Well, you've talked about your upcoming trip. You're still going to Ireland, right?
Yeah.
And when is that trip?
That's not until September.
Not until September. Oh, okay. So you're leaving Europe and then returning.
Oh,
which we got to talk about because I understand that
I have to.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not a choice.
I mean, this is going to be, people know we're on a Europe-centric kick here because we're doing a bunch of Europe episodes, and you currently are working from Europe.
WFE.
Loosely.
Yeah.
And today we're actually going to be talking about a destination. This is a dual episode where you've recently been and I've been in the past to Krakow, Poland.
Krakow, as I call it. Yeah, Poland.
Okay, now before we get too far into it, though, we should just check in. Where are you right now? The Judy alert for your mom. Where are you currently residing?
I'm in Barcelona, Spain, and I'm actually in the Airbnb, which randomly is just a 3-minute walk to the WeWork. So I figured instead of booking all the room and bringing my mic, I could just record here in the afternoon.
You definitely want your Airbnb and your WeWork to be as close as possible. You don't want to have to like walk around, see the city, see the sites, interact with locals, try food and drink. Yeah. So it's good.
I'm eating food and drinking here in Spain. Spain is one of the best places to eat and drink in the world.
Is WeWork a 24-hour operation?
Most of them are 24 hours. Yes.
So what prevents you from just bringing a cot and just rolling out at the WeWork office?
I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I've seen people, staying at the WeWork a little longer than maybe they should. It sometimes takes on like airport lounge vibes,
Yes. I personally, I find it's got kind of an Ace Hotel problem where it's like hip for the sake of being hip. Like some of the WeWorks, I feel like the decor is trying so hard to be like cool Gen X that I would think it would just be embarrassing to be a 47-year-old man sitting there every day.
They've made it. They're very local. They really lean into the local. So there's local art, local books, local.
Do they have like separatist propaganda for Catalans trying to separate from Spain?
It's super corporate friendly. Super friendly.
Sure. Okay.
So they don't bring up any of that.
And how long is this residence in Barcelona?
Just for a week.
A week more. And because my understanding is that you did not realize that there are, being the globetrotter that you are these days with no permanent address. Some would call it a hobo. I'm calling it a globetrotter to be generous.
Yeah.
But in this hobo lifestyle, you didn't realize that most regions of the world have limits of how long you're allowed to stay places.
I did realize. I just thought that Europe, since we've saved it so many times, that we were sort of allowed to.
Not we. You and I had absolutely nothing to do with it.
I mean, in the United States, that we were with their blue passports, sort of just allowed to come and go to Europe as we please.
That is such an American point of view.
An American.
And you said you were aware of it. I am not going to let that lie pass. I do not believe that you were aware of it. I believe that you were out with, I'm guessing, a young man who said, "Oh, wow, so you're going to have to probably head out soon." And you were like, "What?" And then you looked it up. And what is the official rule?
So in the Shizhen region, right? This trade region.
Hey, you say that so
Europe,
naturally.
yeah. Well, I said it wrong, I know, but in this region, I said it with contempt. In this region, we're only allowed to stay here for 90 days out of 180 days. So 3 months every 6 months.
3 months every 6 months. Wow. So,
Yeah.
so are you prevented from going back for 3 months?
Yeah. So I'll basically be,
Wow.
yeah. So I'll be, so out of a miracle, I had found out that my arranged travel literally fell to the day within 90 days. I have since decided to withdraw a few days early, just not to
I think that's a good idea,
that
so as
window.
not to hit day 90.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
who is it, day 90, 91?
Is it? Yeah. Yeah. I'm not like a lawyer.
Does it count? Or have you left when you're in the air?
Yeah.
You know,
And
yeah,
I had ChatGPT count the days, so even that is probably sketchy. So I just feel like it's most definitely safer for me to just leave a few days early. But
I mean,
again,
the fact
reminder,
that you're
check
looking
your,
to Chat GPT to count the days is very upsetting to me.
It's just a lot of
the
day
idea
counting.
that you couldn't look at a calendar and count the days yourself is shocking.
I could have done that.
And
anyway,
so
that's my story. But so
and then
now
are
I'm
you
leaving
coming,
early.
you're coming back to the US after that for a little bit.
Well, I have a brief stopover in Mexico, and then I come back to the US. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Man.
I'll probably see you at some point in June or something.
I don't know. Are you coming up Boston way?
I probably could come up that way.
June though. Remember, in June I'm going to Seattle and Alaska.
That's because I mean I'll see you in Alaska. I'm coming. It's a surprise.
That'd be. I mean, are you kidding? I'd be thrilled. I'd be thrilled. No, and I think we need to start looking to fall dates for when you're going to be here for us to actually get something in this year.
Well,
but happily, even though it's been a little while since we've traveled together, it's going to feel like we're traveling together today because now we've both enjoyed the splendor of Krakow, Poland, and I know we've got an information-packed episode, so I think it's probably time to take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. Well, first, I kind of want to know what made you decide for this time that you're in Europe to prioritize getting to Poland.
It's a great question. I'd been to Warsaw back in 2016, 2017 for a few days. And, I randomly asked a pair of friends that I was going to meet, my friends from Copenhagen, if we could meet in a city sort of in Eastern Europe for a weekend and do like a fun weekend. And they said they wanted to go to Warsaw. So I was like, okay, so let's just do Warsaw. So that's sort of how I got into Warsaw. And then from Warsaw, I was like, well, I'm going to be in Poland. I want to go somewhere in Poland that I haven't been. I haven't been to Krakow. And then if I go to Krakow, I'm going to go to Auschwitz. So it all kind of came together in that way.
Yes. And we're going to do sort of a separate episode on Warsaw and certainly with Auschwitz and Birkenau concentration camps. We want to cordon that off to a separate episode as well, because I mean, especially on the visiting of the concentration camps, much heavier and needs kind of a devoted time just for the stories that you learn there.
Most definitely. So I think today we were going to talk about Krakow proper, which is the cultural capital of Poland. About 1.5 million people in the metro area. And, I don't know when you went, but I was just there a couple of weeks ago. So it was in sort of late February, early March, and it was chilly. But the weather was pretty nice other than it being cold. And I have to say, it's a really beautiful city. That was my first sort of, impression. It feels really old world, and it wasn't as damaged during the war, so it feels, it's just like a very authentic kind of like step back in time. Krakow. That was my sort of initial impression.
Yeah, I was there in early spring and had the same impression. It was like chilly but sunny and pretty. And the summers are beautiful, but the winters can be very, very gray. Yeah. But then again, if you're doing a lot of indoor tourism, it's a great time of year to visit because you're not going to get massive summer crowds.
It's also a city that looks good in gray,
So, and you presumably took the train from Warsaw. Was it like a 3-hour train, something along those lines?
Yeah, I took the train from Warsaw, which was awesome.
And I think that's how most people are going to end up getting to Krakow. And your recommendation recommendation was to, me, I'm the cheaper one, but you say it's worth the €4 to book a seat. And I do have to say, as somebody who stood for the whole 3 hours on a crush train, kind of leaning against my suitcase, I would agree. I remember the ticket guy in Warsaw, who didn't speak great English, seemed to convey, don't worry about it, everybody gets a seat. And that was absolutely not the case.
Yeah, I definitely recommend anytime you're in Europe reserving a seat, pay the extra €4.
And the major things that I would the major impressions of Krakow, if you're considering going, the first is that it still looks very much like a medieval city. I mean, there are buildings that go back hundreds and hundreds of years, and we're going to dive into the castle and the university and the churches that are there. And I do think it reminds me almost of like a Dubrovnik, like very atmospheric, and you can feel the rich, long history of it, just walking around the old town. And I think that adds a lot of the appeal, that it's a great walkable city.
Yeah, it's super walkable. And again, to the medieval thing, unlike Warsaw, where they had to really rebuild and reconstruct Old Town after World War II, Krakow didn't have that. So you do have all these original buildings from this town that has been around just an incredibly long time.
Yeah, and that said, certainly you do get a feel of how decimated the city was by World War II, because there's a whole section of the city that is the traditionally Jewish section of the city, and they've preserved a lot of the history there. I know you visited there, I visited there, and if anyone has seen Schindler's List, this is the city in which that took place, and you can actually visit the factory, which I know you did. So it's not to say that it wasn't, just its population was destroyed by World War II, but the physical city was not.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was Krakow was not a place you wanted to be if you were a member of any of the persecuted groups from the Nazis in World War II. Just it's crazy how in the middle of everything it was. And when you take that trip to Auschwitz, which is only like an hour and a half on the train, you get you understand how close you were to all of that.
Well, and it's interesting because I remember when I visited Poland, it was one of the first really predominantly Catholic countries that I had ever visited. And everywhere you look, there's Catholicism, but I
Right.
do feel that Krakow does a great job at preserving that Jewish history, and there is a Jewish community that still holds on to that past. But in Krakow, the Catholicism is also really in your face, because they really claim John Paul II, Pope John Paul II, as their hometown boy who did good. So JP2 is everywhere in the city.
Yeah, he comes up everywhere. He's in every museum. It's you can't escape John Paul's presence in Krakow, and he is really responsible for some of the Catholic tourism that happens in the city.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember just souvenirs upon souvenirs. There were dolls and puppets and stickers
Yeah.
and posters of John Paul II. And, I mean, it makes sense. It goes back to, he studied at the university there. He was the archbishop there, and then obviously became this global figure, especially sort of post-Cold War, and really drew a ton of attention to Poland by being Pope.
Yeah, and there's we'll talk about a bit about him, throughout the episode, because he does pop up in some of these stories that you would think were totally unrelated to Pope John Paul. He's a citizen. He's certainly a citizen of Krakow, maybe first before he's anything.
So, like a lot of medieval towns, there really is this old town central square market area that is, I would say, the primary tourist destination while you're there.
Yeah, it's the big sort of classic city square with the big market in the middle, and the sort of churches and big buildings and restaurants all around. It's super vibrant and fun, and it's one of those places that's just crowded from morning till night, and the crowds change. Like during the day, it's all, families walking around doing all the little tourist museums and the tower. And at night, it's just like really drunk Europeans, running around those bars that stay open too late.
Yeah, the main market building in the middle is called the Cloth Hall because it was traditionally where fabric and cloth were purveyed, but now it's just kind of the regular open market. And I remember I was there on Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday preceding Easter. And the market was full of a lot of traditional Polish Easter decorations. The one that sticks out in my head is that while a lot of Catholics will carry palms, because in the Bible people lay down palms as Jesus is approaching a town, and in Poland there's a tradition of making these long poles that are supposed to evoke palm trees, and so they're these tall. I mean, they can be like 10 feet, 12 feet tall, all covered with colorful paper and flowers, and they're super festive. I'll throw one of them up on the Instagram, and honestly, Palm Sunday has never because it's leading up to the crucifixion. I always felt very depressed about Palm Sunday, but actually in Poland it felt very joyful.
Yeah, that does sound like a lovely thing to see. I was there during Ash Wednesday, which is the opposite of Palm Sunday, right? Because they burn the palms from Palm Sunday to put on your head.
I guess I've never thought of them as opposites, but and there's lots of, as you said, good places to eat and drink there. And Ryan, I remember Catherine and I actually had a drink up at a second floor bar that I think was in the Cloth Hall, and we had a great view over the Old Town area, which I thought was a really cool way to take it in without being drowning in all the tourist foot traffic. And we had a great view of St. Mary's Basilica, and this is one of the major churches that dominates the landscape there, and it's very distinctive for the fact that it has two towers, one on the left and one on the right, and one is much, much higher than the other tower, which is kind of a weird look. Usually you get a lot of symmetry in church architecture. And what's interesting is that the tall one is technically owned by the government, not by the church, because it serves as a watchtower. And there is a tradition that the story is that in the 13th century, this area of Krakow was being overrun by this Mongol attack, and a watchman in a tower that was on that spot began to trumpet that the city was under attack. And in the middle of his trumpeting, a arrow pierced his throat, and he was not able to finish, obviously. And so still today, every hour, a trumpeter is on that tower and plays only a partial lick, and it's in honor of this 13th century arrow taken to the throat.
That is a great story. I didn't know that, nor did I notice the hourly playing.
Oh yeah, it's still done. And by the way, they come by it honest. There has been a church on that exact site for at least 800 years. Not this church, but they keep building it on the same place.
And that's not to be confused with Town Hall Tower, which is another tower that is on the main market square that dates back to the 14th century and is the only surviving part of the original Krakow Town Hall. And what I love is right next to that, there's a sculpture of a sort of a half a head by a famous Polish artist.
Oh, yeah,
that's
yeah.
There.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a really fun little part of the square too. And two places I want to give a shout out to on the coffee food side. Brusolo Coffee. This is right outside of Old Town, and just a terrific place to sit and hang out, catch up on some reading or some emails. That's sort of right outside of Old Town, and it's just a great atmosphere. And I spent quite a bit of time there. And then this really fun sandwich and wine shop that's right off of Market Square, called Prosciutto. It's prosciutto.
You say it so beautifully.
My Polish is hard, man. That's
Polish
a
is hard. I can't give you the excuse of the Spanish
but I will link
here.
in the show notes. And we're gonna do a better job of linking in the show notes. We got a message on Instagram saying that we have started slacking on these episodes, and I admit to being one of those slackers. So we will definitely have these in the show notes. But 2 places to check out. That place had just really good sort of Italian style sandwiches with fresh deli meats and cheese and good wine, and just a really fun little atmosphere right off the square.
I completely reject that we've been slacking on the show notes. If you look at my Vatican show notes,
no.
A small novel.
I felt like that was a reaction to the message we got on Instagram. Somebody sent us a message and he said the Vatican episode was so funny. Kieran just would not stop talking.
That's funny. I didn't see that message.
Yeah,
that's
was on
really
Insta.
fun. I mean, listen, when you get me in Catholic mode, it's hard to.
We got you past that John Paul pretty fast, though, so that's good. That's good.
Don't worry, he's coming back.
Yeah.
All right. So, once you leave that sort of old town area, that's when you can explore this great park that sort of rings that area, and it's called the Planty, which I originally thought it probably came from the English word plant, but it doesn't, even though it is a planty place. It apparently comes for the fact that it's flat, because this actually used to be the medieval moat that surrounded that old town, and it's been filled in, and it creates this great 2.5-mile oasis right around the town. So again, it just makes it this very approachable, walkable city. So, I definitely recommend, if you go to Krakow, I think you really need at least 2, and I would recommend 3 or 4 days to really be able to explore it, and then take, the day trips out, either to explore the concentration camp tours or to visit the salt mine, which is a popular destination that I'm also going to talk on.
Yeah, I feel like I was there for a week, and there are definitely things that I left being like, oh, I wish I had done that, but I just didn't have the time. So it's definitely a cool city that you could spend at least a few days in.
And Ryan, one of the other major institutions that anchors the city is the Jagiellonian University. And this is the second oldest university in Central Europe. It was founded in 1364. And certainly that is one of the most glorious things, the fact that this is preserved, I mean, so many hundreds of years later, as a center of learning. It has a notable alum, as you'd guess. If it went back to 1364, I'd like to think any university is going to have a few heavy hitters. Particularly, probably the most proud and known alum is Copernicus. Maybe you've heard of him.
Yeah.
And John Paul II, because he seems to have touched every institution in Krakow. And it's an interesting, very ancient looking campus that you can explore. To be honest, a lot of it evokes more like a monastery than a university proper. And that obviously the church informed a lot of the education, and so it makes sense. But also historically, a lot of the academics were, they lived there, they taught there. It was this kind of cloistered life. And, while we're going to talk about the effects on the Jewish community of World War II, it also was where the Nazis rounded up the intellectual elite of the city and killed them at this university, because this university really was a shining intellectual light in this part of the world. And that was where, that was one of the targets of the Nazi regime.
This university, I walked by it quite a few times, because it's not too far from the main square, and I certainly thought it was a monastery. I mean, it does not give off that university vibes, but looking at some of the inside pictures, it's got a bit of Harry Potter kind of going.
Yeah,
on.
it's right. I agree. It's got that like medieval Harry Potter aesthetic. And Ryan, not too far is another basilica that I want to recommend. So, I talked about St. Mary's, and we talked mostly about the exterior. If you are into exploring the interior of churches, at St. Mary's in the Old Town, they have a very interesting and beautiful carved Gothic wooden altarpiece that is usually left open for tourists, and it's got scenes from the life of Mary. And I think an interesting juxtaposition to that very ornate and old-looking church is St. Francis Basilica. And this, of course, with a JP2 connection, John Paul II was Archbishop at this church. And in 1850, there was a fire that sort of ruined the historic interior. And so it's redone in this very Art Nouveau style, which is not. It stands out in a city where so many of the churches go back hundreds of years. And I really strongly remember the impression of this big stained glass window there that's called "God the Father Arise." And what's interesting about it, and it actually picks up very well from the Vatican episode we did, is it's suspected that the artist was inspired by Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, where it is God portrayed as a heavily white bearded man. But it's these incredibly dramatic greens, blues, and purples in his robe. And he's, dramatically holding one hand above his head and one hand down. And it just feels like an incredible amount of motion. And it's almost comic booky in its expressiveness. And so that's another one that I can throw into the Instagram, because I was going through my photos for my visit to Krakow. And this one, I remember I bought postcards of it and I just loaded up because it left such an impression. And it's kind of scary, but it's also very powerful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wish I had actually gone inside. But I'm more of a St. Francis de Sales guy.
Yeah, I know you don't have anybody who's dragging you inside the churches like I would be. I feel like being with me, they'd think, okay, these are two, probably traveling priests together from America. If I was there to leave a good impression,
I am seeing plenty of churches and cathedrals. I promise. On this trip. Do you want to take a walk over to the Jewish quarter across?
Let me just
river?
say one more thing here.
Sure.
One more thing. There's one other artifact that I would call out in St. Francis Basilica, which is a painting of St. Maximilian Kolbe. And we'll revisit his story in the Auschwitz episode. But this is a saint that is beloved by the Polish people. He was a friar who actually gave his life to save a Polish sergeant who was in Auschwitz with him. And he is, a beloved Polish saint who has very distinctive round glasses that you can often tell. And he's when he was a missionary before he became a friar, based in Poland, and before he went to Auschwitz, he had this long beard. And so you can always kind of pick out a picture or a painting of St. Max Kolbe, and there's a very beautiful painting of him in the St. Francis Basilica. You'll recognize it for its orange and blue background. And if you're looking at it, you can actually see he's often portrayed with the triangle badge that would get assigned to in the concentration camps, or even in his prison uniform, often with like vestments on the other side. So that's another place to reflect on the past that we're also going to move into by talking about the Jewish district.
Yeah, and when I toured Auschwitz, they actually talk about where he was kept during his final days in Auschwitz in the prison there. So, these cities, Auschwitz and Krakow, are so deeply connected that you'll see as we go into the Jewish quarter.
So, the old Jewish quarter is, as you'd expect. This was the center of Jewish life in Krakow, which was extremely vibrant, and you can see it preserved in a lot of the area. There's Stars of David's. There's still synagogues that were standing. I mean, pretty amazing that these things weren't completely destroyed by the Nazis in World War II. I remember the site that was most affecting in my mind was the old Jewish cemetery, and this is where the community would bury their dead from 1552 to 1800. And many of the headstones and monuments were shattered, disrespected, defaced during World War II. And the damaged gravestones have actually been rebuilt as a mosaic wall. So sort of this large barrier, and you can still make out bits of script and dates and things that are on it. But really, the better effect is if you stand back and just really take in the amount of destruction and death that happened here. And that's where Krakow, and the whole Jewish quarter, it's interesting because it is today a vibrant and a hipster artistic sort of neighborhood, but such a crushing past that it's hard not to be crying 1 second and then yet trying to take in like how well the neighborhood has recovered. And I think that wall, that mosaic wall of broken gravestones, was one of the most emotionally affecting pieces of history that I saw in Krakow.
Yeah, that the Jewish quarter is really heavy because you can be at like a cute coffee shop 1 minute, and then all of a sudden you're standing in front of the remains of the Jewish ghetto from World War II, and it's like, whoa, the juxtaposition of that is really something. That's another place I'd recommend folks go. Link in the show notes. But obviously during World War II, the Jewish folks from the quarter were made to live in very, very small, what became sort of known as the Jewish ghetto, before they were moved to concentration camps. And one of the walls to this still remains. And there's a famous film, The Pianist, that takes place in the Warsaw Jewish ghetto. Gives you an idea of sort of what life was like there. But right outside of that was Oscar Schindler's factory. And, I had not seen Schindler's List for a really long time, and since this trip, I've gone back and I actually watched sort of like a shortened version of it because I wanted to sort of remember what it was about. And, they turned Oscar Schindler's factory into museum. And for folks who haven't seen Schindler's List, or don't know the story of Oscar Schindler, he was basically like a German kind of mediocre businessman, but super charming, charismatic guy, who sort of fell into the Nazis and had some success, and then had a sort of a turn of heart when he moved to Krakow and ended up saving hundreds and hundreds of people through this sort of factory scam that he was running, essentially employing as many people as he possibly could to keep them from being sent to the camps. And so he's a really interesting guy. And they've turned the factory where a lot of these people worked into a museum that doesn't just look specifically at Oscar Schindler and the Jewish folks that he saved, but really tells the story of Krakow right before the war, during the war, and after, in a really compelling, immersive way. Almost where there were so many like families and school groups going through. It was sort of nice to imagine that all these kids are learning about their history in a way that I feel like sometimes in the U.S. we don't. We're moving away from confronting some of the more dark things in our history, and it's good to see like this is not being forgotten. This history of Krakow is not being forgotten by the residents who live there. But it's a great museum, really impactful and immersive. Taking you through what the Jewish quarter looked like before and after the Nazis came through, showing you a bit about the camps and some of the resistance, and just what life was like for ordinary folks just trying to make it in Krakow in that time.
Right. For what reason were the factory workers protected? Is it just because they, like Schindler was, like said he needed that workforce?
Yeah, he had ingratiated himself with like the local Nazi leadership through gifts. And prior to that, he was sort of like a Rhett Butler. That's how I've imagined him, right? He was like a kind of a profiteer early on. He got involved, certainly in the party, but he was never like ideologically like a Nazi in a real way. And then when he saw what was happening, when he understood what was happening in the concentration camps, he couldn't be a part of that, and he, really dedicates himself to running this factory, to employ as many people as possible. It's a munitions factory. But there's a quote of him somewhere in the talking about how if we ever deliver one working round of ammunition to the Nazis, we failed as a factory. So it was really like, how do we employ as many people as possible, bribe enough guards and bribe enough of the local government to keep this factory, quote unquote factory going. And then, he was able to save all these people by claiming they had very special, like, they knew how to operate these very specific machines, etc. He would employ family members. He was just very, very good at sort of running the factory, keeping the Nazis happy. Kind of, he's a real character. And then near the end of the war, he has to escape and flee because he's going to be picked up as a accomplice with the Nazis. And it's not until really years later when his reputation is, his reputation is revived and folks start telling that story.
Okay. Wow. And how long did the tour take?
It's about an hour and a half.
Okay. Yeah, it's a sizable commitment for,
Yeah.
If you're only there for a day or two. But would you
Yeah.
say it's worth it? If you're only in Krakow for 2 days, would you make time for it?
I think I would make time for it if I was traveling with some younger folks, like family. I would definitely make time for it because it contextualizes a lot there to see. I think if it's if there are other ways to learn about the history, although this was really an immersive way to do that, and I certainly like walked out, learning more than I had learned from the Wikipedia. But I think if you're going to take the trip, to Auschwitz, and you're going to do that, then this is probably something you don't have to do. But that said, it was really, really well put together, very, very immersive museum. And it is right next door to the Contemporary Art Museum, which is a real mixed bag, let me tell you. It's mostly largely art, contemporary art from Krakow. A couple fun things, like they've pulled in some sets from the independent theater is really big in Krakow. In fact, one of the things I wanted to mention that I just remembered was there's a bit about John Paul in the Krakow in the Schindler Museum, because John Paul was a fascist resistor, and during the war he actually performed in underground anti-fascist theater in Krakow. Young John Paul performing in these plays that are kind of going on for the anti-Nazi residents of Krakow is really interesting to me as like a HBO series or something, don't you think? But he comes up quite a bit in there as well. But in Mocha, they've got a lot of like sets to like the Andy Warhol play, and just it was a very food fixated museum, which I thought was interesting. Like a lot of art about food. Certainly not something I would go to as like if I was just going to the Jewish Quarter. But if I'm already going to Oscar Schindler's and you've got 45 minutes to see sort of a really weird Polish contemporary art collection that is next door.
Very cool. And just a couple more of the kind of bigger tourist attractions that I think we got to call out before we head out to the last stop. The other, major tourist attraction that pretty much everyone is going to hit is Wawel Hill, which is pronounced with V's, but it's spelled Dawel. I'm sorry, it's spelled Wawel, Hill. And this is where the medieval castle and Poland's national church is. I know, Krakow is definitely one of those places, and really Poland in general is one of those places where the churches can start to mix together if, you're seeing too many of them in one day. So, I kind of gave the sense of the Gothic art at St. Mary's, the Art Nouveau art at St. Francis, and at if you visit Hill, this is where you're going to get a real jumble of styles that takes you through the whole history of the church in Poland. So you have Gothic, Romanesque, Baroque, all sorts of art styles, because there are so many different chapels that were built and renovated over different times that I think you should just go in and kind of take it all in as a mosaic of that mixture of styles. But one of my favorite things from the hill that you can see is actually the beautiful river view of the Vistula River, which is really the main heart of Polish transportation and commerce. I mean, this is the river of Poland.
Yeah, it's a super beautiful river. You can walk from Old Town to the Jewish Quarter, and you can walk across one of the handful of bridges that separates it. And another thing that's worth doing is walking on that river walk. It's beautiful, and you can get lovely views of the city. And if you're on the Jewish Quarter side, I recommend there's this little cafe called Fresh Cafe that's on the top of a museum, and it gives you this incredible look sort of into Old Town from the Jewish Quarter from up high, and it's very cool.
And Ryan, I thought we could just wrap up with talking about one of the quick trips that you can do outside of Krakow. And, looking online, it feels like there's a kind of a mix of, is this worth it? Is it not worth it? Personally, I had a great time. I know you have visited other salt mines that have similar
The
attractions.
only other salt mine. There's two.
And where was that one that you visited?
That's outside of Bogota.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So if you visited the Bogota one, I think you can skip this one. I know you did. But I haven't visited the Bogota one. So I did go to the Wieliczka Salt Mine, which is spelled Wieliczka. And this is a salt mine that was carved over 3 decades in the 1900s. Salt was a great source of wealth for this area, because this is when spices and salt were hard to come by. And the very Catholic workers spent a great amount of time carving beautiful statues out of salt of saints, and then just purely of art. And there's even a chapel underground that's really striking called the Chapel of Saint Kinga, where masses are actually still said. I think you can even rent it out to get married there. So if you're in Krakow and you're looking for a unique chapel experience underground, I thought it was a really cool place to go. I remember Catherine and I showed up at a time where they were only doing, you have to take a tour, and they were only doing tours in our time period in Polish, and we had to say that we understood Polish and kind of nod along. Otherwise, they weren't going to let us go on that tour.
And boy, is Polish hard to understand and speak. And yeah. Well, I think that's a great Krakow 101. There was again, lots to do. We didn't talk about lots of other small museums and large museums. But I think with that, Kieran, it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan, we're here in the last stop. This is the last segment of the show, the final segment of the show. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment, and it's popularly known as the people's segment. And that's because it's very democratic. It's democratic in that we come together and we share, we debate, we openly discuss and anything. It could be a story, it could be a piece of gear, it could be something we're planning to do, something we're reading, something we saw on Instagram. It could be anything as long as it checks one box. It must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I have to ask you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kieran. My last stop is a little essay by this author, Philip Graham, who just published a new novel and took a road trip across 28 states across the U.S. To drop his novel off in little free libraries. Now there are 200,000 little free libraries. I had no idea. And there's an app.
I mean, in Somerville, it's like there's 20 on my walk to the subway.
Well, there's an app apparently where you can look them up, and so every night, him and his wife would look up which little free library to drop the book off next. And I just thought this was a little lovely paragraph. In Maine, we came upon one built in the shape of a lighthouse. In Chicago, a medieval castle. In Missouri, a tiny barn accompanied by a tableau of plastic farm animals. License plates roof topped another in Denver, while one in Crawfordsville, Indiana, was graced with the blossoming yellow stars and blue swirls of Van Gogh's Starry Night. So just a really fun idea. I don't have this app, but I definitely want to check it out. And I love little free libraries, and the idea of planning a road trip is just really clever. Maybe we should try to get him on the pod.
Absolutely. It sounds thrilling. The story of the little free library movement.
I love it. Did you bring a last stop this week, Kieran?
I did indeed. It's a last stop. It's a teaser, and maybe you could even find it in one of those free little libraries. Though probably not
yet.
It's pretty fresh off the presses. But this is we've got some good news, Ryan. It could have been up in the quest for Rick Steves at the top, but we had to get to Krakow, so I'm putting it here. We'll talk about it again at the beginning of episode 199. But that's to say, for our 200th episode, which we're just a month out from, we are having the return of friend of the pod, godfather of the pod, Rick Steves. And that means that it's time to dig into his latest book, which is really cool. It's called On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu and the Making of a Travel Writer. And this is Rick, it's not a travel guide. This is Rick's personal diaries during a trip that he took from Istanbul to Kathmandu when he was like a young, long-haired, pot-smoking
The photos
hippie.
Are amazing.
Oh, it's incredible.
Sent you a couple of them.
And this is where he was, he was literally a piano teacher who just had this wanderlust that wanted to get out into the world. And this is before, Western tourists were going to Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal. And he hits all these countries and places. And so it's a really, really funny read. And it's what he and I are going to dig into that in the interview. But for anybody who's just looking for, pure travel joy and who loves Rick Steves' writing as much as I do, you definitely hear the nascent voice of the sort of more avuncular figure later on in these young writings.
Well, I love that. I'm looking forward to reading it. And, I'm super happy to see that Rick his health is back and he's back and out with a new book.
He's doing great. So, Ryan, what are we going to talk about next time?
Next time, we are going to go back to Chile and talk about some of the things you can do just a short drive outside of Santiago. So until then.
How short are we talking?
Couple hours.
Okay, not too short. Yeah.
No,
I assume you hired a car. You didn't drive.
I did hire a car. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk about that too. Until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. Ryan, I was thinking that it would be fun to get one of those salt statues and just sort of grade it over, a nice dinner.
Just have a Mary that you just use
that's
your whole
not
life.
A bad idea. That's a good souvenir.